Alrighty, guys. Well, it seems like every so often, maybe once a month or so, we do a segment on X actor who we think, or at least is rumored to be in Avengers Doomsday, says they're not in Avengers Doomsday. And today is no exception because Chris Evans, none other than Captain America himself, or actually, more recently, the Human Torch in Deadpool and Wolverine, has come out. He's doing press for that film. I don't even know what it's called, but I've seen so many press images and videos and clips of him, Dakota Johnson, and Pedro Pascal, whatever this film is. He's promoting this new film. And he was asked, as one might expect, from these outlets who are interested in Avengers Doomsday and comic book movies, if he has talked to the Russo brothers. And so, again, we have to point this out because the major trades, and I'm talking about the Hollywood Reporter, Variety, Deadline, the really reliable ones, earlier on, I believe it was late last year, reported that Chris Evans was going to be coming back in Avengers Doomsday. I think they specifically said Avengers Doomsday, not Secret Wars. They also reported around the same time that Haley Atwell would be coming back as Captain Carter. Now, both have denied the fact. Both have denied this. But, it's all, I would say this. If an actor says, oh, no, I'm not going to be in it, that's not a confirmation of anything, right? If they're kind of like, oh, I don't know, maybe, could be, it's usually a good sign pointing to it. If they deny it flatly, I wouldn't put too much stock into it as well. But it depends, right? It depends on the tenor of the comments. It depends on how honest they're being. It depends on their past track record. If Tom Holland was saying things, I wouldn't trust anything that comes out of his mouth because he lets things slip all the time. So who knows about that? But Chris Evans, getting back to the main topic of the segment, was doing an interview and was asked point blank, are you going to be in Avengers? Or he wasn't asked point blank, actually. I'm going to read this entire interaction here, and then we'll kind of discuss what he has to say. So this is Screen Rant, who was interviewing Chris Evans. And Screen Rant says, Chris, what's the over-under on how many times you've been asked about Steve Rogers today? Chris Evans says, you know what? It hasn't really happened. You might be the first. And Screen Rant says, I hope you're not going to confirm or deny anything with Avengers related. I think that's a typo there. But I will ask, now that Downey, and the Russos are coming back as friends outside of as colleagues. I think there are typos here, or these are transcription errors. Anyways, have you talked to them since they signed the dotted line? Chris Evans says, yeah, I talk to them all the time. It's where Pedro is right now. So Pedro Pascal, who I guess was not there during that segment of the press tour, is filming Doomsday right now, which is exciting. I think it's pretty exciting. Anyways, it's sad to be away. It's sad to not be back with a band, but I'm sure they're doing something incredible, and I'm sure it's going to be that much harder when it comes out and you feel like you weren't invited to the party. So here's the thing. Because again, like I said before, it's very possible that Chris Evans is just straight up lying. I think that it depends on the type of type of actor, type of character that they played, where that character was in their arc. For example, when Elizabeth Olsen says, I'm not coming back, I tend to believe her more, right? Because she seems very definitive of, no, Wanda Maximoff is done, and et cetera, et cetera. And I tend to believe that more. Give it a couple more years, right? Downey Jr. was the same for the few years after his character died, Iron Man. And I believed him. And I mean, there's no reason for Iron Man to come back in the MCU post-Endgame. But a few years later, he was starting to sound more and more like, yeah, I'd love to come back. And then sure enough, he comes back in the MCU as Doctor Doom. I think Elizabeth Olsen is going to be the same way. Chris Evans, though, has kind of always been of the mind of, yeah, I've been, protective of the legacy of Steve Rogers, but I love the MCU and all that kind of stuff. And lo and behold, he came back as Human Torch. He had no problem coming back as Human Torch. Whether or not he would come back as Steve Rogers, I think depends entirely on the story, because I think he's very protective of the Steve Rogers story that played out in the Sacred Timeline in Earth 616. A variant of Steve Rogers, Captain Hydra, or everything else, Nomad that's been rumored. Maybe, right? Maybe. That's hard to say. Here's the thing, though. I actually, and I know the reports that came out a while ago about him coming to Doomsday, the film might have changed. It might have completely changed since then. Who knows? I actually tend to believe that he won't have a big role in Avengers Doomsday. And honestly, the only reason I believe that is because I do think he will have a role to play in Avengers Secret Wars, where, again, I've said this before, every person who has ever come under the Marvel banner, there is a chance that they will show up in Avengers Secret Wars. Doomsday, though, I tend to think while the cast is Herculean, gargantuan, gigantic, I think it won't include everybody. I do think that the cast that was announced a while ago with the chair announcement is not everybody. I do believe that. I don't know if I believe that every single variant of every single character is going to show up in Avengers Doomsday. I think it would make a lot more sense on Battleworld or whatever Secret Wars looks like for those characters to show up. So I think that's what's going on here. So when Chris Evans says no, and I'm going to be sad to see, when Avengers Doomsday comes out and I'm not a part of it, regardless, I don't think even if he does show up in Avengers Doomsday in some capacity, even as cameo, I don't think he's going to be part of the main cast. And so I think that it is true what he's saying, in my personal opinion, that he's going to see Robert Downey Jr. and the Russos, and he's going to be like, oh, what a bummer, I would have loved to have been there. And that's totally, totally fair. I don't think this precludes him from lying. I don't think that this means he's not lying about this at all. I happen to think that it makes a little more sense for him to say, I'm not going to be in Doomsday, but I do think at the end of Doomsday, whatever is going to happen, it might open up a whole can of possibilities for him to be like, yep, you saw what happened at the end of Doomsday. We're in Battleworld now. Anything's possible. We'll see. He's denying he's in Doomsday. We'll see what happens there. Guys, what do you think? Do you think Chris Evans will show up in Doomsday as Captain America, as Human Torch, as Nomad, as Captain Hydra? Let me know in the comments down below.